The morning air was crisp and clean, the kind that makes you grateful for being alive. Dr. Nia Thompson had just finished her usual 5-mile run through the neighborhood, her wireless earbuds still playing her favorite podcast about criminal justice reform. She wiped a thin layer of sweat from her forehead and slowed to a walk, letting her heart rate settle as she made her way back home. Riverside Heights was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed about. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained sidewalks, kids riding bikes without a care in the world. Nia had worked hard to afford her place here. Years of law school, countless sleepless nights studying, building her practice from the ground up. Now, at 38, she was finally reaping the rewards of all that sacrifice. She adjusted her running jacket and checked her smartwatch. 7:15 in the morning. Perfect timing. She'd be home in 10 minutes, just enough time to shower and get ready for her 9 o'clock consultation with a new client. Her mind was already running through the case details when she heard the low rumble of an engine slowing down behind her. Nia glanced over her shoulder. A police cruiser was crawling along the street, matching her pace. She felt that familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came from years of experiences she wished she didn't have. But she kept walking. She lived here. She belonged here. She had every right to walk down this street. The cruiser pulled up beside her and she heard the electric whir of the passenger window rolling down. 2 officers sat inside, both white men, probably in their early 40s. The one in the passenger seat had a thick neck and a buzz cut that reminded her of every bad movie about corrupt cops. The driver wore sunglasses even though the sun had barely risen. "Morning," the passenger said, but his tone wasn't friendly. It was the kind of greeting that wasn't really a greeting at all. Nia pulled out one earbud. "Good morning, officers. You live around here?" Buzzcut asked, leaning his elbow on the window frame like he had all the time in the world. Her jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "Yes, I do. Just finishing my morning run." "Uh-huh." He looked her up and down, taking in her expensive running shoes, her designer athletic wear, her smartwatch. "Which house?" "The brownstone on Maple, 2 blocks that way." She pointed down the street. The driver finally spoke up, pushing his sunglasses down slightly. "That's a nice area, pricey." There it was. The implication hanging in the air like smoke. How could she possibly afford to live there? What was she really doing in this neighborhood? Nia had been through this dance before. Too many times before. "Yes, it is. I'm very fortunate. Mind if we see some ID?" Buzzcut wasn't asking. He was telling. She stopped walking now, turning to face them fully. "Am I being detained?" "Just want to verify you live here, ma'am. We've had some break-ins in the area. I'm out for a run. I don't typically carry my wallet when I'm exercising." She gestured to her form-fitting athletic wear, which clearly had no pockets. "But as I said, I live 2 blocks from here. I'm heading home right now." The driver opened his car door and stepped out. His name tag read Officer Garrett. He was tall, probably 6'2", and he used every inch of that height to try to intimidate her. "We're going to need you to cooperate, ma'am." Nia's hand instinctively went to the small clip on her jacket collar. It looked like a decorative pin, maybe a fitness tracker or a fashion statement, but it was actually a camera. A tiny HD body camera she'd started wearing 2 years ago after her 3rd encounter with police. While doing nothing but existing in her own neighborhood, she pressed it once, activating the recording. "I am cooperating," she said calmly. "I've answered your questions. I've told you where I live. I'm not sure what else you need from me." Buzzcut, whose name tag said Officer Randall, got out of the car too. Now both of them were standing on the sidewalk, blocking her path. "Here's the thing. We don't recognize you, and we know most of the people who live in this neighborhood." "That's interesting because I've lived here for 3 years." Her voice remained steady, professional. Years of courtroom experience had taught her how to control her emotions even when her heart was racing. 3 years, huh? Randall crossed his arms. "Funny, I don't remember seeing you." "Perhaps you haven't been paying attention." The words came out sharper than she intended, but she was tired. Tired of this. Tired of having to prove she belonged in her own neighborhood. Garrett took a step closer. "You getting smart with us?" "No, officer. I'm simply trying to get home. Then show us some ID. As I explained, I don't have it with me, but I'm happy to walk to my house right now, and you're welcome to follow me. I can show you my driver's license, my mortgage documents, my utility bills, whatever you need." Randall smirked. "Mortgage documents? That's cute. You rent, or is it Section 8 housing? The comment hit her like a slap, but she didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. Much worse. I own my home, officer. And I'm not sure why my housing situation is relevant to this conversation. By now, curtains were starting to twitch in nearby windows. A few neighbors had come out onto their porches, morning coffee in hand, watching the scene unfold. Mrs. Patterson, the retired teacher who lived across the street, stood on her front steps with her phone raised, clearly recording. Garrett noticed the growing audience and his jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to put your hands where I can see them." "My hands are already visible." She held them up slightly, palms out. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just trying to walk home. Are you resisting?" "Absolutely not. I'm complying with your requests. I'm standing here answering your questions. Then you won't mind if we pat you down. Make sure you're not carrying anything." Her stomach dropped. This was escalating fast, and she knew exactly where it could lead. She'd represented too many clients who'd started out in situations just like this and ended up in handcuffs or worse. "Officer, I'd like to call my attorney." "Your attorney?" Randall laughed, a harsh bark of sound. "What, you got a lawyer on speed dial?" "Actually, yes, I do." She slowly reached for the small pocket in her running jacket where she kept her phone. "Don't move." Garrett's hand went to his belt, hovering near his weapon. "I'm reaching for my phone," she said clearly, moving in slow motion. "I'm getting my phone to make a call. I'm telling you what I'm doing before I do it." She pulled out her phone, and that's when Randall moved forward and grabbed her wrist. "I said don't move." "I told you what I was doing. You're now physically restraining me for trying to make a phone call." Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. The camera on her collar was catching everything. Mrs. Patterson was still recording. At least 3 other neighbors had their phones out now. "You're being suspicious," Garrett said. "Suspicious of what? Walking in my own neighborhood? Being black while jogging?" The words came out before she could stop them, hanging in the air between them. Randall's grip on her wrist tightened. "Now you're playing the race card?" "I'm stating facts. I've done nothing wrong, yet I'm being detained, questioned, and now physically restrained." "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Garrett said, moving closer. "No, officers. You're making this harder than it needs to be. My name is Dr. Nia Thompson. I'm an attorney. I live at 847 Maple Street. I'm out for my morning run, which I do every single day. And right now you're violating my civil rights." The words hung in the air. Attorney. Civil rights. The terms should have made them pause, should have made them reconsider. But Randall just sneered. "Oh, you're a lawyer." "Sure you are." "I am. And you're currently providing me with an excellent case study in racial profiling and unlawful detention." Garrett laughed. But there was uncertainty in his eyes now. "Lady, just show us some ID and we'll be on our way. I've already explained that I don't have identification on me. I've offered to walk to my home to retrieve it. You've refused that option. So tell me, officers, what exactly do you want from me?" The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. More neighbors had gathered, a small crowd forming on the sidewalk across the street. Someone called out, "That's Dr. Thompson. She lives here." But the officers seemed to have backed themselves into a corner, and neither one appeared willing to back down now. Randall's grip on her wrist hadn't loosened. If anything, it had gotten tighter. Nia could feel her pulse throbbing against his fingers. And she knew this would leave marks. Good. More evidence. "Officer, you're hurting me," she said clearly, projecting her voice so everyone watching could hear. "I need you to release my wrist. When you cooperate, I'll let go. I am cooperating. I've been cooperating since this started. You're the ones escalating this situation." Garrett spoke into his radio, his voice low but urgent. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. We need backup at the corner of Riverside and Oak. Got a suspicious individual refusing to comply." Nia's eyes widened. "Backup for what?" She was a woman in running clothes standing on a public sidewalk. But she knew what suspicious individual meant in the police code. It meant they were setting up a narrative, building their case for whatever came next. "Officers, I want to be very clear," she said, looking directly at each of them. "I'm not resisting. I'm not fleeing. I'm not threatening you. I'm standing here speaking to you calmly. There is no reason for backup." "Let us determine what we need, ma'am," Garrett said, his sunglasses now tucked into his shirt pocket. His eyes were cold, calculating. He was the kind of cop who'd been on the force too long, who'd seen too much and felt too little. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars appeared, their lights flashing red and blue against the peaceful morning scene. It was surreal, like some kind of twisted street theater. 4 more officers emerged, all looking around for the apparent crisis that had required their response. One of the new arrivals, a younger officer with kind eyes and a nervous expression, approached Garrett. "What's the situation?" "Potential trespasser. Refuses to provide ID, getting aggressive." "I'm not aggressive," Nia interjected, her voice rising slightly. "That's a complete misrepresentation. I've been nothing but calm and cooperative." The young officer looked at her, then at Randall's hand still gripping her wrist, then at the growing crowd of neighbors. His face showed confusion, like he was trying to figure out what he'd walked into. Mrs. Patterson called out from across the street, her voice wavering with age, but strong with conviction. "Officers, that's Dr. Thompson. She's lived here for years. She's a wonderful neighbor." "What on earth are you doing?" Another neighbor, Mr. Chen, stepped forward with his phone held high. "I'm recording this." "We're all recording this. This is completely uncalled for." Randall finally released Nia's wrist, but only to point at the crowd. "Everyone needs to step back. This is police business." "This is a public street," Mr. Chen shot back. "We have every right to be here and to document what we're seeing." Nia rubbed her wrist, feeling the tender spots where Randall's fingers had dug in. The skin was already turning red. She looked at the new officers, trying to appeal to whatever sense of reason they might have. "My name is Dr. Nia Thompson. I'm a civil rights attorney. I live 2 blocks from here. I've been stopped while returning from my morning run. And despite explaining who I am and offering to prove my residence, these officers have detained me, physically restrained me, and called for backup. I need to know what crime I'm suspected of committing." One of the older officers from the second car, a gray-haired man with sergeant stripes, stepped forward. "Ma'am, they're just trying to ensure neighborhood safety. By harassing a resident who's done nothing wrong, how exactly does that make the neighborhood safer?" The sergeant's face tightened. "Nobody's harassing you. You're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" The word stung. "I'm being detained by 6 police officers for walking down my own street. If that's not worth being upset about, I don't know what is." Garrett leaned in close, his voice low enough that the cameras might not pick it up clearly. "You know what your problem is? You think you're better than everyone else. Think you can come into a nice neighborhood like this and act like you own the place." "I do own the place," Nia said, meeting his gaze. "I literally own property here. And even if I didn't, I'd still have every right to walk down this street without being harassed." "Harassed?" Randall laughed. "Lady, you don't know what harassment is. Actually, I do. It's my job to know. I've spent 15 years defending people whose rights have been violated by law enforcement. I've won cases against police departments in 3 states. And right now you're giving me the clearest example of racial profiling and unlawful detention I've seen in months." The words landed like bombs. The officers exchanged glances, and Nia saw something shift in their expressions. Not regret, not exactly, more like the dawning realization that maybe they'd made a mistake. But pride and ego are powerful forces, and neither Garrett nor Randall looked ready to back down. The young officer spoke up again. "Look, maybe we can just walk with you to your house, verify your residence, and we can all move on." It was the most reasonable thing anyone had said so far. Nia nodded. "That's what I suggested 10 minutes ago. I'm happy to do that," but Randall wasn't done. Not so fast. She was being uncooperative, reaching for her phone without permission. That's suspicious behavior. Reaching for my phone to call my attorney is suspicious? Since when is exercising my legal rights considered suspicious? When you do it in a way that makes officers feel threatened. Nia almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about this. "I'm 5'6" and weigh 130 pounds. I'm wearing form-fitting athletic clothes with no place to conceal a weapon. I told you exactly what I was doing before I did it. In what universe did I threaten you?" "You don't get to decide what's threatening," Garrett said, "and you don't get to make up threats that don't exist just to justify your actions." The crowd had grown larger now. At least 20 people lined the street, some in their bathrobes, others in work clothes, all watching this unfold. A few were shouting words of support. "Let her go. This is ridiculous. She lives here." The sergeant held up his hands. "Everyone needs to calm down." "We are calm," Mr. Chen said. "Your officers are the ones who seem agitated." Another neighbor, a young woman Nia recognized from the community garden, called out, "Dr. Thompson helped my family with a housing discrimination case. She's a hero in this community." "What is wrong with you people?" Randall spun around. Ma'am, I need you to be quiet. No, the woman said firmly. I won't be quiet. This is wrong and everyone knows it. Nia felt a swell of gratitude for these people, her neighbors, standing up for her. But she also felt afraid. She knew how quickly situations like this could spiral. She'd seen it happen. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and everything could go horribly wrong. Officers, she said, trying once more to de-escalate. Please, let's just walk to my house. I'll show you my identification. You can verify everything. Then we can all go about our day. Garrett looked at Randall and something unspoken passed between them. Finally, Randall nodded. Fine, but if this is some kind of game, it's not a game. It's my life. They started walking. Nia in front with Garrett beside her, Randall close behind, and the other officers trailing like some kind of bizarre parade. The neighbors followed too, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly not willing to leave her alone with the police. As they walked, Nia's mind raced. She was already planning her next moves. The footage from her body camera would be downloaded and backed up immediately. She'd need to file a formal complaint, contact the local ACLU chapter, maybe even reach out to some journalist friends. This couldn't just slide. But then Garrett spoke again, and his words made her blood run cold. You know, people like you are the problem. Always playing victim. Always making everything about race. People like me? Nia stopped walking. What exactly do you mean by that? You know what I mean. No, I don't. Please explain what you mean by people like me. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The meaning was clear enough. They reached her brownstone, and Nia climbed the steps to her front door. Her hands shook slightly as she unlocked it, and she hated that they could see her nervousness. Inside, she grabbed her purse from the entry table and pulled out her wallet, her driver's license clearly visible behind the plastic window. There, she said, holding it out. Nia Thompson, 847 Maple Street. This address. Randall took the license, examined it like it might be fake, then grudgingly handed it back. Fine, fine. Nia's voice rose. That's it? No apology? No acknowledgement that you just harassed an innocent person? We were doing our job, Garrett said flatly. Your job is to protect and serve, not to intimidate and discriminate. The sergeant stepped in, clearly trying to smooth things over. Dr. Thompson, I'm sure this was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? She looked at all of them, these 6 officers standing in front of her house, and felt the full weight of exhaustion settle over her. I was walking home from a run. That's all I was doing, and somehow that turned into being detained, physically restrained and humiliated in front of my neighbors. If that's a misunderstanding, then your department has a serious problem. The young officer looked genuinely uncomfortable. The others just looked annoyed, like she was wasting their time. Are we done here? Randall asked. Yeah, Nia said quietly. We're done. For now. The officers started to walk away, their job apparently done. But something in Randall's posture, the casual way he dismissed the whole encounter, made Nia speak up one more time. Officers, wait. They turned, and she could see the irritation on their faces. They wanted this to be over. They wanted to move on and forget about it. Nia reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. The paper was thick, expensive, embossed with gold lettering. She held it out, and the young officer took it, his eyes scanning the text. She watched his face change, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his eyes widen as he read and reread the words on the card. Something wrong? Garrett asked. The young officer didn't answer. He just handed the card to Garrett, who looked at it, then passed it to Randall. The 2 men stood frozen, staring at the simple piece of cardstock like it was a live grenade. The card read, Dr. Nia Thompson, Senior Partner, Thompson & Associates Civil Rights Law. Below that was a list of credentials that would make anyone in law enforcement nervous. Harvard Law School, 3 landmark civil rights victories, board member of the National Civil Liberties Foundation, consultant to the Department of Justice on police reform. You're that Thompson, Randall said, his voice barely above a whisper. I told you my name, Nia replied calmly. Several times Garrett's face had gone pale. He knew the name. Every cop in the city knew the name. Thompson & Associates was the firm that had successfully sued their department twice in the past 3 years. The firm that had cost the city millions in settlements. The firm that had ended careers and forced policy changes. We didn't realize. Randall started, but the words died in his throat. You didn't realize I was someone important enough to treat with respect? Nia's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. That's exactly the problem, isn't it? You should treat everyone with respect, regardless of who they are or what they do. The sergeant stepped forward, and now his expression was all business, all concern. Dr. Thompson, I'm sure we can resolve this. Resolve what exactly? She cut him off. The fact that your officers racially profiled me. The fact that they physically restrained me without cause. The fact that they called for backup because I had the audacity to be black and exercise in my own neighborhood. That's not what happened, Garrett protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Really? Because I have it all on camera. She pointed to the small device on her collar. Every word, every action, from multiple angles, actually. She gestured to the neighbors still gathered on the sidewalk, many still holding their phones. Mrs. Patterson called out, I got the whole thing, Dr. Thompson. Sent it to my grandson already. He's very good with computers. Randall looked like he might be sick. Listen, Dr. Thompson, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Wrong foot? Nia's laugh was sharp, humorless. You grabbed my wrist. You accused me of trespassing in my own neighborhood. You implied I couldn't afford to live here. You called me suspicious, uncooperative, and aggressive when I was nothing but calm and polite. Which foot would have been the right one? The young officer spoke up, his voice shaking slightly. Ma'am, I just arrived on scene. I wasn't part of the initial contact. No, you weren't. But you stood by and watched while your colleagues violated my rights. Silence is complicity, officer. He looked down at his shoes, unable to meet her eyes. Garrett tried a different approach, his tone shifting to something that might have been meant to sound apologetic. Look, we deal with a lot of situations. Sometimes we have to make quick judgments. It's not personal. It's always personal when it happens to you, Nia shot back. And quick judgments based on the color of someone's skin? There's a word for that. We don't tolerate racism in our department, the sergeant said, but the words sounded hollow even as he said them. Then how do you explain what just happened? No one had an answer for that. The silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of morning traffic and birds singing in the trees, oblivious to the tension below. Nia took a deep breath, centering herself. This was what she'd been trained for. This was why she'd spent years learning the law, understanding the system, building her practice. Not just for moments like this, but for all the people who didn't have her resources, her education, her platform. Here's what's going to happen, she said, her voice quiet but commanding. I'm going to go inside and download this footage. I'm going to document my injuries. She held up her wrist where the red marks from Randall's grip were already darkening to purple. Then I'm going to contact my colleagues at the firm. We'll be filing a formal complaint with your department, with the city, and with every oversight body that will listen. Dr. Thompson, please, the sergeant started. I'm not finished, she continued. I'm also going to reach out to the media, because this isn't just about me. This happens every day to people who don't have law degrees or fancy business cards, people who don't have neighbors willing to stand up for them, people who might not survive these encounters. The officers exchanged worried glances. They knew what media attention meant. They knew how quickly things could spiral in the age of social media and viral videos. But here's the thing, Nia said, and now her voice softened slightly. I don't want to destroy your lives. That's not who I am. What I want is change. Real change. I want you to understand what you did wrong. I want your department to understand why it was wrong, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. What are you saying? Randall asked, and there was hope in his voice now, desperate hope. I'm saying that I'm willing to consider alternatives to a full-scale lawsuit, but only if your department is willing to work with me on meaningful reform, bias training that actually works, community oversight, changed policies on stops and identification requirements, real accountability. The sergeant pulled out his phone. I need to call the chief. You do that, Nia said. And while you're at it, you should probably call your union rep too. Oh, and your department's legal counsel. They're going to want to get ahead of this. As the sergeant walked away, phone pressed to his ear, Garrett and Randall stood awkwardly on the sidewalk. The young officer had retreated to his patrol car. The other two officers who'd arrived as backup were pretending to be very interested in something across the street. Mr. Chen approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance but close enough to be heard. Dr. Thompson, anything you need, you let us know. The whole neighborhood has your back. Thank you, Nia said, and she meant it. That means more than you know. We should have come out sooner, Mrs. Patterson added, walking over with her cane. The moment we saw them stop you. I'm sorry we didn't. You're here now. That's what matters. Randall cleared his throat. Dr. Thompson, I want you to know that wasn't personal. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who was scared. Scared of losing his job. Scared of the consequences. Scared of being called what he probably was deep down but didn't want to admit. That's the thing you don't understand, she said softly. It was personal. To me, it was deeply personal. Because it wasn't about this one morning. It was about every time I've been followed in a store. Every time I've been asked if I'm in the right place. Every time someone has looked at me and seen a threat instead of a person. I didn't mean, yes, you did. Maybe not consciously. Maybe you think you're a good person who doesn't have a racist bone in your body. But intentions don't matter when the impact is the same. I still end up with bruises on my wrist. I still end up humiliated in front of my neighbors. I still end up feeling unsafe in my own community. Garrett had been quiet, but now he spoke up. What do you want from us? I want you to do better. I want you to think before you act. I want you to question your assumptions. I want you to see people as individuals, not stereotypes. That's a lot, is it? Is treating people with basic human dignity really that much to ask? Before anyone could answer, the sergeant returned, his face grim. The chief wants to meet with you. Today, if possible. He's very concerned about this situation. I'm sure he is, Nia said dryly. Concerned about the lawsuit or concerned about what his officers did? Both probably, the sergeant admitted. At least you're honest. She checked her watch. I have appointments all morning. Tell him I can meet at 2 o'clock. My office. Not the station. Your office, the sergeant repeated, making a note on his phone. That's right. On my turf where I have my files, my team, and my evidence all in one place. The sergeant nodded, understanding the power play. I'll let him know. As the officers finally began to leave, Randall hesitated. Dr. Thompson, for what it's worth? I am sorry. Sorry you did it or sorry you got caught? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. When they were gone, Nia finally allowed herself to lean against her doorframe, exhaustion washing over her. The neighbors began to disperse, offering words of support and encouragement. Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hand. Mr. Chen promised to send her his video files. Inside her house, Nia locked the door and walked to her bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror. Same person who'd left for a run an hour ago, but somehow different. Tired. Angry. Determined. Nia's office at Thompson & Associates occupied the entire third floor of a historic building downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the space with natural light, and the walls were covered with framed degrees, awards, and photographs. Photos of her shaking hands with senators, photos from courtroom victories, photos of communities she'd helped. By 10 o'clock that morning, the story had already started spreading. Not because Nia had released anything yet, but because her neighbors had. Mrs. Patterson's grandson, it turned out, wasn't just good with computers. He was an influencer with over 200,000 followers, and he'd posted the video within an hour of the incident. The caption read, "This is Dr. Nia Thompson, civil rights attorney. This is her neighborhood. This is what happened when she went for a morning run. This is why we need police reform." By noon, the video had 500,000 views. By 1 o'clock, it had been picked up by 3 local news stations and 2 national outlets. Nia's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Her email inbox was exploding, but she remained focused, methodical, doing what she did best, building a case. Her law partner, Victoria Chen, burst into her office carrying 2 tablets and a laptop. Have you seen the numbers? This is everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. People are furious. Good, Nia said, reviewing the footage from her body camera on her computer screen. They should be furious. The police union issued a statement. They're claiming the officers were following protocol. Of course they are. Nia didn't look up from her screen. They always do. That's why we need to change the protocols. Victoria sat down across from her. They'd been partners for 8 years, friends for longer. Victoria had been there for every major case, every victory, every setback. What are you thinking? Full lawsuit or settlement? Depends on what the chief offers this afternoon. But honestly, I'm leaning toward making this as public as possible. We've settled before. We've taken the money and signed the NDAs, and nothing changed. Maybe it's time to try something different. Going public means a long fight. You know that. I do. But staying quiet hasn't worked. How many more people have to go through this before something actually changes? Before Victoria could answer, their paralegal knocked on the door. "Dr. Thompson, there are reporters in the lobby. 5 of them. They're asking for a statement." Nia and Victoria exchanged glances. "Already? The video's at 2 million views now," the paralegal said. "It's trending on 3 platforms." Nia stood, smoothing her blazer. She'd changed from her running clothes into a perfectly tailored navy suit, her natural hair styled in elegant twists. She looked every inch the successful attorney she was. "Tell them I'll give a brief statement at 1:30. Set up in the conference room." "You sure about this?" Victoria asked after the paralegal left. "Once you go on record, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure. This isn't just about me anymore. It never was." At 1:30, Nia stood in front of a cluster of microphones, cameras trained on her face. She'd done this before, but never as the victim. Always as the advocate for someone else. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice steady and clear. "This morning, I was stopped by police while walking home from my morning run in my own neighborhood. I was questioned, detained, physically restrained, and treated as a suspect despite having committed no crime. I'm a civil rights attorney with 15 years of experience. I know my rights. I know the law. I knew how to protect myself. But I'm standing here thinking about all the people who don't have that knowledge or those resources." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This happened to me in broad daylight in a nice neighborhood with witnesses and cameras. Imagine what happens in places where there are no cameras, where there are no witnesses, where the victim doesn't have a law degree or a platform to speak from." A reporter called out, "Dr. Thompson, will you be suing the department?" "That remains to be seen. I'm meeting with the police chief shortly. What I want is accountability and change. Real, meaningful change. Not just apologies and promises that mean nothing." "What kind of changes?" another reporter asked. "Comprehensive bias training that's actually effective, not just checking a box. Community oversight with real power, not just advisory roles. Change policies on stops and searches. Accountability measures that have teeth. And an acknowledgement that racial profiling is real. It's damaging, and it needs to stop. Some people are saying you're overreacting, that the officers were just doing their job." Nia looked directly at the camera. "If treating a law-abiding citizen like a criminal is just doing their job, then the job itself needs to change. I was walking home. That's all. I shouldn't have to prove I belong in my own neighborhood. No one should." The questions continued, but Nia kept her answers focused and professional. She didn't rant or rave. She didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. At 2 o'clock sharp, Police Chief Robert Harrison arrived at her office with his legal counsel and the department's public relations director. He was a tall man in his late 50s, his hair more salt than pepper, his uniform crisp and decorated with years of service medals. "Dr. Thompson," he said, extending his hand. She shook it, noting the firmness of his grip, the steadiness of his gaze. He was a political animal, she could tell. Smart enough to know when he was in trouble, experienced enough to know how to try to manage it. "Chief Harrison, please sit." They settled around the conference table, lawyers on both sides, tension thick in the air. The chief's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, opened a folder. "Dr. Thompson, we've reviewed the incident. The department is prepared to offer an apology and—" "Stop," Nia said quietly. The attorney stopped mid-sentence. "Let me be very clear about something. I don't want your apology unless it comes with action. I've heard too many apologies in my career. They're empty without change. What exactly do you want?" the chief asked. "I want what I've always wanted. What I've been fighting for in courtrooms for 15 years. I want your officers to stop seeing black and brown people as automatic threats. I want them to check their biases before they check their guns. I want policies that protect citizens, not just police." "We have diversity training," the PR director interjected. "And yet here we are," Nia replied. "So clearly it's not working." The chief leaned forward. "Dr. Thompson, I know your reputation. I know you've won cases against departments across the state. I also know that you've worked with some departments on reform. You're not just about punishment. You actually want to make things better. That's true. But I'm also done being patient with departments that drag their feet on change. Then help me understand. What would real change look like to you?" Nia pulled out a document she and Victoria had been working on all morning. It was comprehensive, detailed, and ambitious. "This is a reform proposal. It includes mandatory quarterly bias training with third-party assessment, community review boards with actual disciplinary power, body cameras that can't be turned off, changed use of force policies, regular community meetings, independent investigation of all complaints, and consequences for officers who violate civil rights. The chief's attorney flipped through the pages, her expression growing more concerned with each turn. This is extensive. Civil rights violations are extensive, Nia countered. The damage is extensive. The reform needs to match the problem. Some of these changes would require union negotiations, the chief said. That could take months. Then start today. The union can fight me if they want, but I guarantee the public pressure will be on my side. The PR director looked nervous. The video already has over 3 million views. The mayor's office is getting hundreds of calls. Good, Nia said simply. You understand that this could get ugly, the chief said. Legal battles, media coverage, investigations. It'll consume months of your life, but do you think I don't know that? This is what I do. I've taken on bigger departments than yours. I've won cases that everyone said were unwinnable. I'm not afraid of a fight. But you'd rather not fight if we can come to an agreement, the chief said, reading between the lines. I'd rather the fight not be necessary. I'd rather officers like Garrett and Randall actually understood why what they did was wrong. I'd rather the next black person going for a run in their neighborhood doesn't have to worry about being stopped and humiliated. The chief was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Give me a week. Let me take this to the mayor, to the city council, to the union. Let me see what I can make happen." A week, Nia agreed. But I'm not keeping this quiet during that week. The video stays public. I'm going to keep talking to the media. I'm going to keep pushing. I wouldn't expect anything less. After they left, Victoria let out a long breath. That was intense. That was just the beginning, Nia replied. Over the next few days, the story exploded beyond anyone's expectations. National news picked it up. Civil rights organizations issued statements of support. The video was analyzed on talk shows, debated on news panels, shared millions of times across social media. But the response wasn't all positive. Nia started receiving hate mail, angry messages calling her everything from a troublemaker to far worse. Death threats filled her voicemail. Her office had to hire additional security. Victoria wanted her to take time off to step back, but Nia refused. "This is exactly why we need to keep going," she said. The pushback proves the point. People are uncomfortable because we're forcing them to look at something they'd rather ignore. 3 months later, Nia stood in the city council chambers, watching as the mayor signed the Police Accountability and Reform Act into law. The room was packed with community members, activists, journalists, and yes, police officers. Some looked angry. Some looked resigned. A few looked genuinely hopeful. The journey from that morning encounter to this moment had been exhausting. The police union had fought every proposed change. Conservative media outlets had painted Nia as anti-police. She'd received thousands of hateful messages. Someone had even vandalized her office, spray-painting words she'd rather forget. But the community had rallied. Neighbors who'd witnessed that morning had testified at hearings. Other victims of racial profiling had come forward with their stories. National civil rights organizations had thrown their weight behind the reforms. And slowly, painfully, change had come. The new law wasn't everything Nia had asked for. Compromises had been made. Some teeth had been pulled from certain provisions. But it was more than any previous reform effort had achieved. Body cameras were now mandatory and couldn't be turned off during encounters. A civilian review board with real disciplinary power was being established. Bias training was now quarterly instead of annual, with independent assessment and consequences for failure. Use of force policies had been updated, and a community liaison program was being launched to rebuild trust between police and the neighborhoods they served. Officers Garrett and Randall had been suspended without pay for 3 months. They'd undergone intensive retraining and were on probation. Randall had actually reached out to Nia, asking if they could talk. She'd agreed, though she remained skeptical about his sincerity. Their meeting had been awkward and tense. Randall had apologized, truly apologized this time, and admitted that he'd never really thought about how his actions affected people. "I just saw threats," he'd said. "I never saw people." "That's the problem," Nia had replied. "When you stop seeing people as human, you can justify anything." The meeting hadn't fixed everything, but it was a start. A small crack in the wall of defensiveness and denial. Now, as the mayor finished signing the bill and cameras flashed, Nia felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride, certainly. Exhaustion, definitely. But also a bittersweet awareness that this was just one city, one set of reforms, one small step in a much longer journey. Chief Harrison approached her after the ceremony. "Dr. Thompson, I want you to know that I'm committed to making these reforms work. Not just on paper, but in practice. I'll be watching," she said. "We all will, I know. And honestly, that's good. We need that oversight. We need that accountability." He paused. "I'm sorry about what happened to you, and I'm sorry it took something so public to force these changes. So am I, Chief. So am I." But the story didn't end at the city council chambers. Nia had learned something during those 3 months of fighting. Her experience, as painful as it had been, could be a catalyst for something bigger. She launched a new initiative through her law firm, Know Your Rights, Know Your Power. It was a comprehensive program that provided free legal education to communities most affected by police misconduct. Workshops on civil rights, what to do during police encounters, how to document incidents, how to file complaints. But the part Nia was most proud of was the body camera distribution program. Using funds from settlements her firm had won over the years, plus donations from supporters around the country, they distributed small, affordable body cameras to people who wanted them. Thousands of cameras going to communities where trust in police was lowest and the need for documentation was highest. "Everyone should have the protection I had," Nia explained in an interview. "Everyone should be able to prove what happened to them. We can't change the system if we can't show the truth." The program went viral. Other law firms started similar initiatives. Technology companies donated equipment. A movement was building and Nia was at its center. 6 months after that morning encounter, Nia was invited to speak at a national conference on criminal justice reform. The auditorium held 2,000 people and every seat was filled. She stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. Lawyers, activists, community organizers, police chiefs, politicians, people who wanted to learn, to change, to do better. "I want to tell you about a morning run," she began. "About a simple thing that shouldn't have been complicated. About being stopped in my own neighborhood for the crime of walking while black." She told the story, not sparing any details. The audience was silent, rapt. Some faces showed anger. Some showed shame. Some showed determination. "But here's what I want you to understand," she continued. "This isn't really a story about me. I'm one person. I had resources, education, a platform. What about all the people who don't? What about the teenager stopped on his way to school? The grandmother questioned while gardening in her own yard? The father pulled over for no reason while driving his kids to practice? Every day in cities across this country, people are subjected to the same treatment I experienced. Most of them don't have cameras. They don't have law degrees. They don't have thousands of supporters ready to amplify their voices. They suffer in silence and nothing changes." She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "That's why this work matters. Not just to hold individual officers accountable, though that's important. Not just to win settlements, though victims deserve compensation, but to change the entire system. To shift the culture, to make sure that skin color doesn't determine whether you're treated as a citizen or a suspect. The reforms we passed in my city aren't perfect. They don't solve everything, but they're a start. And they're replicable. Every city can do this. Every department can change. It requires courage, yes. It requires admitting that there's a problem. It requires facing uncomfortable truths. But it's possible." The audience rose to its feet, applauding. But Nia held up her hand. "Don't applaud me. Go home and do the work. In your cities, your communities, your departments. That's what matters. Not my story, but what you do with it." After the speech, dozens of people approached her. Community organizers wanting advice on local campaigns. Attorneys wanting to start their own Know Your Rights programs. Police chiefs, some of them, actually asking how they could implement similar reforms in their departments. One woman, tears streaming down her face, grabbed Nia's hands. "My son was killed during a traffic stop 3 years ago. Watching what you've done, seeing you fight back and make real change, it gives me hope. It makes me feel like his death might not have been meaningless if it can be part of pushing for reform." Nia hugged her. This stranger who'd lost so much. "I'm so sorry for your loss. And I promise you I'll keep fighting. We all will." A year after that morning run, Nia was invited back to her neighborhood for a community celebration. The city had installed new streetlights, created a community garden, and launched a youth mentorship program, all part of the improved police community relations initiative. Mrs. Patterson was there, of course, along with Mr. Chen and dozens of other neighbors. The young officer who'd been there that morning, the one who'd looked so uncomfortable, was there too. He was part of the new community liaison program, and he'd actually been doing good work, building bridges between police and residents. "Dr. Thompson," he said, approaching nervously, "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" "For not giving up. For pushing for these reforms. I became a cop because I wanted to help people. But somewhere along the way, the training, the culture, it made me see threats instead of neighbors. These reforms, they're helping me remember why I joined in the first place. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't redemption. But it was growth. And that meant something." As the sun set over Riverside Heights, Naya found herself back on those same streets where it had all started. She was wearing running clothes again, her small body camera clipped to her collar. Some habits were hard to break, and maybe they shouldn't be broken. Vigilance, unfortunately, was still necessary, but something was different now. People waved as she passed. A patrol car rolled by, and the officer inside nodded respectfully. Children played on sidewalks without fear. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. One set of reforms in one city wasn't going to solve centuries of systemic racism, but it was better than it had been. And better was worth fighting for. Nia's phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. Another city just passed similar reforms. That's 12 now. 12 cities following our model. 12 cities. Hundreds of thousands of people who might be just a little bit safer. A little bit more protected. It wasn't enough, but it was something. She picked up her pace, running now, feeling the rhythm of her feet against the pavement, the steadiness of her breathing, the strength in her legs. She was still here. Still standing. Still fighting, and she wasn't alone. Across the country, in cities big and small, people were organizing, documenting, demanding change. The movement that had started with one humiliating encounter on a quiet morning street was growing, spreading, taking root. As she rounded the corner toward home, Nia thought about all the people who'd come before her, who'd fought the same battles with fewer resources and more risk. She thought about all the people who'd come after, who'd continue the fight when she was gone. This wasn't just her story. It never had been. It was a story that stretched back through generations and would continue forward through generations more. But for now, in this moment, Nia was just a woman going for a run in her neighborhood. Simple. Ordinary. The way it should have always been. She climbed her front steps, unlocked her door, and stepped inside her home. Safe, protected, free, tomorrow. There would be more work to do. More cases to fight, more reforms to push, more minds to change. But tonight she allowed herself to rest, to feel the satisfaction of progress made, however incremental. The body camera on her collar blinked its red recording light. Still documenting, still vigilant, still ready. Because change was happening, yes, but the need for accountability hadn't disappeared. Maybe someday she wouldn't need the camera anymore. Maybe someday everyone would be treated with the dignity and respect they deserved, regardless of their skin color. Until then, she'd keep running, keep fighting, keep pushing, one morning at a time, one encounter at a time, one change at a time. And slowly, painfully, hopefully, the world was getting a little bit better.